Ooh, wasabi guys, coming back at you with another 10 underrated commander cards. Now, a lot of these are just incredibly underrated. I feel that some of these may have seen a very limited amount of play, just not enough people giving them a chance in this format, but I still think that they see some play enough to really give me the impression that they are much more important, much more valuable than what they've been given credit for. I definitely think these all have potential for seeing an increased amount of play in the future. So let's get on to this here. First off, we have Lake of the Dead. When it comes into play, you have to sacrifice a swamp or you bury it, of course. Right off the bat, yeah, you have to get rid of your own swamps. And while this may be counterproductive at first when you realize that you can just sacrifice a swamp to add 4 black to your mana pool, anytime you can generate more mana than what you already have, it is technically mana ramp, so long as you do it at the right time, get the mana exactly when you need it. Don't try to overextend, and you won't really be punished for sacrificing too many lands, but it's still a decent land here. Definitely, though, when we think of mana ramp in these colors, we tend to think of Cabal Coffers, as well as the Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth combo there. While that can get you way more mana than this, it's definitely a consideration. I think when we also have cards like Phyrexian Tower, which are a little bit better. You don't have to risk your lands just for the sake of getting more mana, but it's still a decent option. You get 4 black mana. Not a lot of stuff can ramp you up 4 black mana just for sacrificing a land. It has that going for it. Next we have Command Beacon. Now, this was actually one of those cards that kind of shot up in price initially because it was only printed in one of the Commander decks from Commander 2015. However, it's not as big of a deal anymore. I think now people have kind of just written it off as a poor man's Caracas, which it kind of is in this format. Obviously, it doesn't hit legendaries, it just hits your commanders, so it's significantly worse, and you have to sacrifice it, so unless you have things that can recur lands, it's not going to be something that's that abusable. However, I still think it's a very good utility land that not enough people know about. Though it kind of fits into the whole slot of, are you playing Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots? Because if you are, you might also consider playing a Command Beacon, because being able to replay your commander is probably a very important thing for your deck. So being able to just recast it from your hand is basically like saying you're going to be paying its original converted mana cost rather than the 2 extra or the 4 extra based on how many times you've cast it from the command zone. So it has that benefit. Is it going to combo like Caracas? Probably not, but it's a decent solid utility land, and Caracas is also banned, so yeah. Next we have Abolish. Now there's a ton of artifact and enchantment hate in this format, but very rarely do we ever see that at the potential of being casted for free without having to pay any mana. So you do have to discard a Plains card in order to do that, but with Abolish you get basically 0 mana removal for an artifact or enchantment. It doesn't exile, so it's not preferable to a lot of other cards in this format, but I think definitely if you're playing mono white, or if you're playing any deck and you desperately need some sort of removal for artifacts and enchantments, and you feel like you're lacking in that removal category, this is definitely something for you to consider. I think the fact that it has to be a Plains card limits it to more of a mono white build. You could stretch it to 2 color at best, I think, but you mainly want to give yourself the best chance of discarding a Plains card if you're going to be playing this type of card. Still think it's great removal though. Next we have Twilight Shepard. If you love angels, you're probably going to love Twilight Shepard here. Has persist, so each time it dies it comes back with a -1/-1 counter on her, and each time she enters the battlefield you can return all cards sent to your graveyard this turn, and you get them all back to your hand. That's really good, very underrated. I know a lot of people would rather just have permanents returned to the battlefield rather than have cards returned to their hand. However, anytime you can just replenish your hand is just, it's always going to be good. It's always going to help you recover, and I think white has that benefit of being able to recover well, and the fact that you have persist makes her more useful, makes her definitely something that you can grind out games with. So very underrated card, decent option in white as well. Then next we have Capsize. Very good spell. I think it's starting to catch on here. I'm seeing a lot more blue deck lists playing Capsize. It's an absolute threat that I think people are now starting to realize that it's just absolutely insane. I'm sure we all know by now, if you get infinite mana and you play something with buyback, you're going to cause a lot of hell. And being able to bounce pretty much everything to your opponent's hands, you've won the game. Don't even bother trying anything else. I mean, it's still a good card even if you don't have that excessive amount of mana. Being able to just leave all your mana untapped, they're going to think you're playing Cyclonic Rift and you just buy back a Capsize over and over again. So it's very unexpected. I feel most people are expecting Cyclonic Rift when you have a lot of mana untapped, and to see this come out of nowhere, it's a little bit more precise. You're not going overkill. You're not really going to be punishing too many people, but it's more precise, it's more political, and that's just precision in general, and that's why I love Capsize. Next we have Kalitas, Traitor of Get. If a non-token creature an opponent controls will die, you exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard, and they get a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield under your control. So very good. Like, that's the main reason why I think that he's underrated in this format. There are so many graveyard-based decks, and I feel like not enough people are playing this as a hate card. More people are trying to put this into their decks as a token support card, but in reality, or even just putting it into decks that synergize with +1/+1 counters like, say, Marchesa. However, I feel that this card should be played more for being just a hate card against the graveyard-based decks, which are just so abundant in this format. I could go on for how many different interactions there are with the graveyard and how many different combos interact with the graveyard, and being able to exile a creature that would be sent to the graveyard. Obviously, when it dies, you exile it, and you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. So it does give you that support, but that really doesn't matter. You're in it to exile creatures that die. You have that benefit of just disrupting any sort of combo or strategy they have there. Next we have Manglehorn, a very new card from Amonkhet, and I think that it kind of falls into that slot where people are kind of debating as to whether or not they're going to replace Reclamation Sage with Manglehorn, but I feel that Manglehorn, it's its own card. It's not a new version of Rec Sage. It's an artifact hate card. Rec Sage is just good artifact enchantment removal on a body. This is hate on a body. It's very similar to Thalia from Eldritch Moon, where you had that hate against the artifacts that enter the battlefield tapped. But I just feel that utility, it's never to be underestimated, it's never to be taken for granted, and even though it may not be that big of a deal and it may not see a wide amount of play yet, I still think that it's one of those cards that it could become a staple, and especially if you're looking for just good removal on a creature. How many decks synergize with artifacts? I mean, come on, there's Breya, one of the most popular commanders in the entire format, let alone the fact that every single deck, for the most part, relies on artifacts for either mana ramp, protection, haste, just anything in general, like good utility. So the fact that you have utility on a creature to remove them is just absolutely insane, and I love it. Then we have Multani Morose Sorcerer. Really, I mean, very similar to Crush the Blood-Braided, commanders like that just get massive, and they have no other abilities, so you kind of have to give them evasion. It's always going to be that downside. However, the fact that Multani cannot be the target of spells or abilities makes it just insane. The fact it comes into play, it has power and toughness, each equal to the total number of cards in all players' hands. So it's going to get just absolutely massive. The only downside is that you can't enchant it with any of your stuff unless you have a way to remove its Shroud, which is kind of pointless in the first place. You have something that it's very similar to Thrune, where it has protection built in. Unfortunately, it's Shroud. It's not hexproof, so you can't enchant it. It's not going to be that Voltron strategy that you're thinking it's going to be, but I still think that, yeah, big creatures, they get a bad rap in this format because they don't have evasion, they don't have that. But there are ways to give creatures trample. There are ways to pump creatures up. We have crater hoof like effects in this format. We have overrun effects that give all our creatures, huge buffs, and then they give them trample. So you have ways of just benefiting from just a massive creature. And even at that, it can't be the target of spells or abilities. So your opponents are gonna struggle trying to get rid of them, and you're just going to be able to swing every single turn. And why wouldn't you? Built-in Shroud, so why wouldn't you do that? I mean, just a very underrated card here. One of the more underrated, if you were to say just a Voltron style commander without actually being able to equip anything or enchant him with anything. Very interesting, kind of funny too. Then we have a card kind of to flip the script here. We're going to go more defensive. Assemble the Legion. Now, you can play this defensively, which is what I usually do, and there are, of course, the many token strategies and Boros and Naya colors and so forth that would consider Assemble the Legion. However, I do tend to play it more defensively. I think that if you're playing an aggressive removal-based deck and you have a lot of board wipes, building counters over time can never be underestimated, and you're just going to gain a massive army. It may take some turns before it builds up, but anytime you can get tokens, your upkeep. I mean, we have the Bitter Blossoms, we have the Awakening Zones in this format that are just so useful. They don't do too much, but what they do is they give you a consistent number of creatures each upkeep, and it's something that you can expect to use them as sack fodder. You can, enable other things to go off. Assemble Legion is no different than that. Although it is a little bit more expensive than the Bitter Blossoms, it's definitely going to get you even more tokens over the long run. Just keep that in mind. It can double as a defensive card, it can double as an aggressive card, or it could just be, sack fodder or whatever you need it for. Definitely a good, useful card here. It's not as quick as other Boros cards tend to be, so I think it gets overlooked for that main reason, but it's definitely worth the consideration. Next we have Blade of Selves. Now, this is very similar to Command Beacon, where it was very popular for a short period of time until people just for some reason stopped playing it. It's very good with Omnath Locus of Rage, because the obvious interaction there, when the copies of the legendary they're sacrificed, it deals damage and you have that interaction there. It's kind of cool, but not a lot of people are expanding the idea and bringing Myriad to other strategies, which I feel makes it underrated. And Myriad, the fact that it's just right there in this Commander 2015 set and we don't really see it anywhere else, it's very unique, and they almost you can kind of tell that they were thinking this is going to be a very powerful keyword, which it is on Blade of Selves. They were right to be careful and not bringing it to putting it on other cards. So it's very powerful, and I think that people should be a little bit more creative and open their mind up to a card like this. Myriad is, again, one of my favorite keywords, and I think it should see more play. And Blade of Selves is just a great equipment card. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for these 10 underrated cards. If you like this video, share it, hit the thumbs up button. If you have not already, subscribe to my channel. I do a lot of other top 10 videos, underrated cards lists. I do deck techs, other things. So anyway, guys, I'm signing off. Void here. Have a wonderful day.